us today.
So we are recording now. So I would like to thank my friend, Professor Susan Kiguli, for being here with us in this morning. Okay, I'm saying morning, but in different parts of the planet is afternoon. But we are here today to celebrate Susan's life, Susan's poetry, and to hear from her about literature, about some similarities and differences between Brazilian culture and African culture. We are trying to establish this bridge that has been broken so many years ago. So we are trying to connect what was once a single continent, and we are bringing and building these bridges between Brazil and Africa, and Brazil and Uganda. I want to read some introduction about Susan. So Susan Kiguli is a Ugandan poet, poetess, and writer. She was born in 1969, and she is known for her lyrical and reflective poetry that addresses themes such as identity, gender, history, and politics. Kiguli is also a professor of literature at Makerere University and has published her work in several anthologies of African poetry. Kiguli has been an advocate for creative writing in Africa, including service as founding member of FemWrite, Uganda Women Writers Association, a judge for Commonwealth Prizes, Writers' Prize, and an advisory board member of the African Writers Trust. She is considered an important voice in contemporary African poetry, and her work is often included in reading lists for scholars and admirers of African poetry, a group in which I am part. So Susan, welcome to Brazil. We are very happy to have you here. I will not, guide this conversation. Perhaps you could start by talking a little bit about your experience as a writer in Uganda. How is the process of writing, and why writing now? Why writing poetry? What are your motivations, your motives? What triggers your creativity? And in this sense, whatever you say will be welcomed for us. So, Susan, thank you again. And it's with you now.
I'm very nervous, I must say, even though you are recording. I hope everybody hears me well. Wonderful. I don't know where to start, but I'm very, very honored and very privileged to have been given this opportunity to meet with all of you and talk with you. It's really a very touching moment for me. My friend Gustavo is a wonderful person. He has kept in touch since we first met. I'm not a very easy person to keep in touch with because I sometimes don't reply emails. But I thank you very much for your persistence to keep this voice in touch with Brazil. And because of you, we grew up hearing about Brazil, but in this contemporary world, you hear what some people may want you to hear. And if you don't go out for yourself to seek to hear what speaks to your heart, to seek to hear what makes sense within your context, you may only hear from one side. As the African writer Chimamanda Adichie Ngozi has made popular, they are the dangers of a single story. Before probably you asked so many questions, I don't know which one to begin with, but maybe before that, I want, if that is okay with everybody, I want to start by reading one of my poems that may be regarded as recent, because I wrote it during COVID, when we had lockdown, the first lockdown here in Uganda. We had several lockdowns, but this was written during the first lockdown. I have quite a number of poems that I wrote during the lockdown. This is one of them. I just thought I would read this. Don't ask me why, because maybe I won't be able to give you the answer. I hope everybody is hearing and can follow my accent. I hope so. Right. So I'm going to read the poem. This is written in English. I write in English and Luganda. Luganda is my mother and father's tongue. It's the language that my people around me, my most immediate people, speak. So it's the language I probably first heard when my mother got me all those years ago. But I will not read Luganda now. I'm going to read the good about me. The poem is titled The Good About Me. If there is anything fine about me in this realm, it's you, Mother. It is that sense of sight, of affinity for your womb, then at your breast, and countless times in your lap. It is the sensation of eternal embrace, whether you are here or gone. So when people profess that they sometimes see the egg yolk yellow of the sun in my eyes at noon, it's you, Mother. If there is anything fine about me, it's you, Mother. Faith in moments when things are tensely tied up, when roads are dry and raging, and even angels seem asleep. If in these times I tread the rocky road of life and keep my eyes off the sweat and blood and take wings, and my voice is heard singing in the morning sky, then it is you, Mother. It's you. In these days when we are hemmed in by disease, in this period when a virulent virus has driven us behind doors, it is hard to believe in goodness. Then I look out of a window and behold petals of a pink rose unfurling in my neighbor's garden. For some reason, life returns. You return, Mother, getting through our door, coming from the country, laden with sweet pineapples, and crashing into the chair, remarking laughingly that you are pleased to be in the studio, pointing at our photograph-packed living room. Then you look around the library, our small bedroom, beaming with books tucked away for safety. I think of you. And across the yard, I pull that rose in my neighbor's garden to our living room by sheer willpower. I breathe in the scent of the flower with my eyes closed and think the world is filled with perfume. And you are the center, Mother, the center of hope, the center of blossoms, the center of benevolence. With that flower comes the aroma of your cooking, and all the savory legacies across generations which you kneaded into our being, processing stories of which herb, vegetable, or slice melted perfectly on the tongue. With your cuisine came our history, the stirring of our soul, the company of our present. It is all the thrills of your country, all the struggles of this nation, the bonds, the narrative of our survival, the soaring spirit, the victory over ruptured histories, the magnum opus of memory. If there is anything fine about me, it's you, Mother.
That's so beautiful, so touching, you know, so profound. Thank you.
Thank you. I thought that maybe it may be a good way to begin this conversation. I'm sorry the poem was a bit long, but there we are. I don't know exactly where to begin, but maybe thank you. Maybe I begin with telling you that from childhood, words meant so much to me, even before I understood what really words could do. I somehow like to hear things. I like to think over what I heard. And I started writing in secondary school. That is my vivid memory. I may have written one thing or two when I was in what we call primary school, that is between the age of 5 to the age of 12. But I was more aware of my writing in secondary school. I have said this in a number of interviews, so I won't belabor this point. But I wrote in secondary school because my friends, because my teachers, first of all, inspired us to listen to stories. And then they encouraged us to write. So one day I wrote for my class a poem, and they all thought it was a poem about a fly. I don't know why I wrote about a fly. And they all thought it was good, and they encouraged me to be their class poet. And from the encouragement of my friends, I began to write with the inspiration of what speaks to me and spoke to my friends. I didn't realize the magnitude of what I was doing then until I came to university. And all these literary theories were introduced to us of whose stories you should hear, why you should hear these stories. And then some of the things began to make sense. Because when I was in secondary school, I was in a missionary founded school. So we did a lot of British literature, which I think was good, because Shakespeare, for example, speaks to so many situations. I know people have dismissed Shakespeare sometimes because, you know, sometimes we so get fed up of the empire that we begin to not to listen to anything about the empire because it's been drummed down our throats for so long that we just resist the empire. And sometimes, of course, then when you're resisting, you may resist even the things that could make sense. Because when you read Julius Caesar, it's relevant. It's very relevant. There are things in Shakespeare that speak to the humanity of all of us. And I think that's important too. It's an important point for us to understand. I don't believe in this whole concept of universal, but I believe that there are similarities even between enemies, there may be similarities. And I think there is a proverb in our language that it's not good to dismiss your enemy just like that. I think it's important to study the things that you think make you an enemy to somebody in order to understand what makes you an enemy or what makes the environment around you hostile. But back to what I was saying, that at secondary school, we're also introduced to African writers like Achebe. We were introduced to things fall apart. And I thought, this makes so much sense. I liked the stories. Some of the things in Things Fall Apart were so cheeky, and were at that age of 12, 13, 14, when cheekness is something cool. So there were those stories that were really exciting, and we irritated our teacher asking some questions. And then we're introduced to East African writers. Some of you may have heard of a writer, Ngugi wa Thiong'o. Oh, great. We were introduced to Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and the stories made so much sense. So I began, when we came to university, and they were explaining to us that the stories of our context, that the stories that our parents and forebears came up with and composed were important. And that when you thought your own language and your own stories were important, then you began to see importance in you. These things began to slowly make sense. And so for me, writing is not simply something that you do to take down your stress. For me, writing is something that you do to make meaning to you, to make meaning to the center of your existence. It is something that you do to make you reflect on where you as a human being and your community comes from, in order to make sense of where you're going. And so I think African literature is very important, as of course Brazilian literature would be important, because in that literature, in the voices of our people, there lies who we are. There lies the answers to some questions of how did we get here? What are these stories? For example, I know that your professor talked to you about Tekayo by Grace Ogot. And when I first read Tekayo, I resisted Tekayo first because there had been all these stories about cannibals, and I've never seen cannibals. But everybody, we have a joke here that the cannibal must be in the next village, because people talk about cannibals, but you never see them. So they must be somewhere away from you. But when this story, it has made sense over the years. First of all, from the vantage point of this whole thing about cannibals and about African people eating each other and all those stories. And then also the stories of the mysterious, of people going after what they don't understand, and then maybe enjoying what they don't understand, enjoying the foreign, because this liver was got by Tekayo from an eagle. He didn't know where it came from. He didn't know where the eagle had got it from. But he roasted it and enjoyed it, and then started craving for things he didn't understand. And one thing that is interesting for me, or was interesting for me in this story, was why didn't he ask? Why? I mean, why did he just eat something from an eagle? This was a bird. I know it's a bird of power, but it was a human being. Well, there are so many questions. You see, for me, I don't know if I'm going on too long, but you see, for me, there's the asking questions about the stories we receive, about the theories we receive, about the things that are thrown at us, about our own situations. I think asking questions is key. Because then, like Gustavo said, I'm very interested in identity. So asking questions about who we are is very important. And if we say we want to build bridges, why should we build those bridges? What is going to be the benefit of building bridges? What is important about you and me talking to each other at different times? Because I'm here and it's 4:04 and it's morning in Brazil. And I know there may be people from other places. It's other times. What is important about us coming together? And why should we come together anyway? Why should you sit there listening to me and trying to follow a Ugandan accent? Why? And what does it take to concentrate and understand what I'm saying? I don't know, Gustavo, if you want to come in, because I could go on and rant. One of the things I keep telling my students is I earn my bread by talking. So someone has to stop me sometime.
Susan, you asked so many questions. And well, I will try to answer one. Why to build these bridges? You know, Susan, I'm teaching English for, I don't know, 20 years or something, 22 years I'm teaching English. And I have taught English in so many different ways. This is the most advanced way of teaching, you know, online classes. And what I discovered, because in the beginning I didn't believe that online teaching would be something, but then I realized that we can build bridges no matter the mean, you know, the way. These bridges are not built physically. The bridges between people are somehow built spiritually through language, you know. So language is the real thing. And when you said in the beginning that you had this feeling about words, I have to say that I had the same sensation. You know, I collect dictionaries. I have read dictionaries thoroughly, you know, from the first page to the last page. So I love words because they build some realities that somehow would be invisible. I think words open windows and doors to in invisible places, because after you learn that new word, you can see it in reality. So our process is inverted. You know, most animals, they touch things to understand what they are. In our case, we learn the words and then we know what they are. So our system is inverted. We need words to see reality. Without the words, reality is limited. And what poetry does is that it generates impossible realities that cannot exist physically. So poetry is generating a reality that is beyond material, you know. And I think poetry is the way that we really humanize ourselves. I think it's our most advanced system of communicating is poetry. Because we can communicate with people in so many different times and places and eras, because it's alive. You know, it's language alive. It's language carrying a soul. You know, like it's like a genie in a bottle that every time you read the poem, this gene erupts. And if you read one poem in your life and you really read that poem will be with you forever, you know. Like the poem Love from Susan Kiguli, that is with me forever. It's part of my life. It's part of my existence. It's part of my journey with art, with everything. So, and many other poems constitute myself. And I'm very glad for the poets the poets and the poetess to exist, because they really change my perspective on existence, on life, on feelings. So I think we can be educated by poetry. So, but I read this and I don't understand. So yes, this is good too. You don't need to understand the poem immediately. You know, some poems, they need to ferment, you know? So it's after that fermentation that you start, oh, I see it now. Because it's not so simple, you know. Reality is so complex to catch the big picture, and poetry adds dimensions to this picture that would be invisible. So, Susan and my students, poetry is what gives finishment. You know, when you build a house and the house is okay, you can live in the house, it's functioning, it's good. Poetry will give the finishment. It will transform that surviving cave into a real home. So I think that's what is poetry for me. It brings me home.
Wow.
So, well, Susan, I will let these people speak with you. I know they will be very nervous. And I will let some of you. So if you want to ask Susan a question, I think you raise your hand, you elaborate the question, and you just talk. Or if you just want to make a commentary or whatever, I will let you speak now. If you want, and don't feel pressured. I told you they get nervous, Susan.
I understand. I'm nervous too.
So, well, you keep thinking there. So I will continue. When you decide to raise your hand, I will ask Susan one or perhaps two last questions. Susan, now a very specific question that I thought before this meeting. I study one Brazilian author called Carolina Maria de Jesus. Carolina is a very famous writer. Actually, she's the Brazilian writer that has reached further in the planet, more than all the big writers that we have. Carolina's book was translated to, some people say 17 languages, but other people say 40 languages, her book. Child of Dark, Quarto de Despejo. And she was a very poor Black woman. And she lived collecting papers from the trash. She was recycling. She had 3 children and alone, living in the very, very poor conditions. But she kept writing every day. She collected her notebooks from the trash, and she continued to write and write. One day, there is this reporter, and he decides he hears that there is this woman that writes, and he goes after her. He collects these diaries, and it is published, and it becomes a big, big success. Carolina was the first, actually the first Black woman in this country in 1966, so it's yesterday, to be published in Brazil. There were other 2 or 3, but she was the big one. But she continued to be poor. You know, she died poor. So, Susan, my question is, how is the editorial system in Uganda and in Africa in a bigger perspective for female writers? There are many female writers working. Is it publishable or is it like in Brazil? Not now, but it has been very difficult in Brazil for women to publish.
Thank you, Gustavo. That's a big question. But thank you also for talking about Maria as Jesus. I don't know how to pronounce the name so well. I think I should go before my mirror and pronounce it. But I've heard about her, and we also had a chat with you about her. Going to women writing in Africa, this is a big question. But women's voices have struggled. Not struggled because they couldn't write, but coming to the fore. And it is in the early 1970s that we really began to see women's voices come to the fore. But in each country, because Africa is a big continent, in each country, it's the same experience, but in different ways. So you have the early writers, the early voices like Flora Napa from Nigeria. Then you have in the early 70s, you have Ama-Ata Edu, whose story you read and whose work and whose passing away you honored by the article that I saw. But women writers have struggled to be visible. The male voices have taken center stage. I think it was like a mirroring of what literacy meant to the West. When colonialism came, when people started to struggle to have their voices heard, the first people that had their voices heard were the men. And in Africa, I don't know Brazil, you tell me what happens there. But in Africa, you have this traditional system where most traditional systems in different places in Africa, where the male is the patriarch of a family, of a community. And then you got Christianity and you got the Western culture coming in, and the men were at the fore. So in a way, the women were twice silenced in Africa. The so-called traditional system did not put them at the forefront. Nor did the Western system, when it came, nor did it put them at the forefront. So when people started going to school, the boys were sent to school. Mm-hmm. And the girls were prepared for marriage and for homemaking. I think homemaking is a great thing, because without homes, I don't think we can survive. But I think people should be given equal platform to make homes together, and the responsibility should not be left to one gender. But anyway, coming to Uganda, because this is a big question, but coming to Uganda, you had a few female voices in the 70s. But the big voices, for example, in poetry that first came out and broke, were big, were male. The biggest Ugandan poet that was first published in 1966 in English, but had written long before in his local language, Acholi, Okot Pabitek. If you Google, some of you Google Song of Lawino, he was male. You begin to hear about some voices of female writers in the 70s. But the actual breaking through of women writers in Uganda, for them to take center stage, and in a way they've dominated the scene now, is when Mary Karoro Okrut, who was a lecturer here at the university where I teach, Makerere University, the oldest university in Uganda, started what we called FemRite, the Uganda Women Writers Association, because she felt that there were no female voices, that if they were there, there were lone voices against an army of male voices. And sometimes when you are one voice, unless you're very loud like me, when you're one voice, you may not be heard amongst the din or the noise of other voices. So I think what FemRite meant to Karoro Okrut and what it meant to the rest of us who became founder members of this association is solidarity in voicing how we saw things as women. That we had stories that we could tell from the woman's point of view. Don't get me wrong. It's not that the women had the truth, because there are different facets of truth. But it was important that we told the truth from how we saw the truth, from how we saw the stories, from our lived experience. Because I think it's important that when you put out a story from your lived experience, other people get in contact with that story and can have a conversation with you. And when people start to have a conversation with you, then you are acknowledged as human. So writing, performing, composing is one way of humanizing us, giving voice to us, so that someone can say, I don't like that story because I do not connect to that story. And then we go back to what I said. Then you begin to say, why don't you connect to that story? Oh, because I haven't gone through the experience of being a single mother. Well, you cannot go through the experience of being a single mother because you're male. You'll be a single father, not a single mother. And then we can begin from there and ask, how many single fathers are there? How do they cope? How many single mothers are there? Why are they single? Is it because there's been war and the women are widows? And if they are widows, why are the women widows? Where are the widowers? Why are the women, why are the men the ones that died and the women did not die? So who was sent to the forefront? Why were the men sent to the forefront? And why did the women stay home? Oh, because the women cannot handle war because of this and the other. Then we begin to deconstruct those theories and we begin to interface with those theories and maybe interject those theories. So I think I mean, if I were I've written a number of articles on women writers in Uganda, women on femRight, on how femRight came to be, on what femRight does. femRight tries, at the moment, femRight also now includes male writers, especially upcoming male writers, in maybe not publishing them, but in giving them a platform. We have what we call the Writer Readers Club, and people come together and they discuss their stories and critique their stories and then find avenues for those stories.
Wow.
I don't know if that makes sense. People are very quiet and I'm beginning to get extremely nervous.
No.
Someone save me from my nervousness.
It's fantastic, Susan. Thank you so much. I have one gift for you before we conclude this fantastic conversation. I have a gift for you because we have been talking for some time, but I don't want you to go without this. So first thing I want to say that, Susan, today we are going to present the play, The Day My Bata Bata Exploded. And in this play, we are going to present it at traditional theater in Goiânia. And this play has your poem. And I want you to watch the reciting of your poem in Portuguese, to you to see that those bridges have been built and you live with us forever. There is no way around. So, Susan, this is my gift for you.
Irão as nossas crianças conhecer e abraçar o futuro, tal qual um magneto permanente?
Saberão elas da ternura, nas cores vivas do sol e do arco-íris? Irão as nossas crianças conhecer o contentamento quieto de se viver diariamente, um com o outro?
E de se brindar ao futuro? Dirão as nossas crianças que o amor é estar-se perto, sem palavras?
Irão as nossas crianças conhecer o amor melhor?
Que nós, que temos vivido esses tempos de ódio,
serão as nossas crianças belas em sua juventude?
mais do que nós, que descobrimos que a juventude não é eterna? Serão suficientemente fortes os braços de nossas crianças para abraçarem uns aos outros? terão as nossas crianças tempo para fecharem os olhos e sentirem a energia um dos outros? Senti-los.
Que os forcem a abri-los e fechá-los para sempre. Conquistarão as nossas crianças o nosso passado desmembrado?
E lerão os nossos crimes para evitarem as nossas punições? Reconstituirão elas as nossas alegrias? E jogarão fora as nossas lágrimas?
Irão nossas crianças conhecer e viver o amor, livre de armas e de valas coletivas. As crianças raptadas para servirem às nossas desgraças.
Irão as nossas crianças se livrarem dessa carga e viverem o amor?
So beautiful, and Susan. I imagine that it might be a very interesting experience to listen to your poem in a different language and the rhythm. And I have to say, Susan, that Valeria, the actress, is here. The one that is reciting the poem is here. Susan, I think some students raised their hands. I know we have already taken almost 1 hour from you, and I would ask the students to be, succinct in their questions. And so I think I have Marco, Maria, and Ludmila. And so you can, I think Lud was the first one to raise her hand. So Lud, you can ask your question, and then do you prefer to listen to all the questions, or you listen?
No, are you listening me?
Yes, loud and clear.
Yes.
I just want to say that I'm grateful for your inviting, and I want to thank Susan for this opportunity, for her generosity. And you are right when you say that the word changed our lives. And I confess, Susan, that I didn't read you already, but I'll do it immediately. And I'm sure that your words will change my life too. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Lud. Lud is the reviser of my thesis, and we had a long work together last month, and she was very generous too with me.
A grateful work.
And very patient. So I think it's Alison, and then Maria. You can go, Alison. Alison is the one that I told you that has been my student since he was a little teenager, and he has been with us since then for more than 15 years. He was my student, and he's my friend, and he's working on his thesis in France. So go, Alison.
Hi, I want to make a question about your creative process. Can you hear me well? I don't know.
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. You like mostly to write poems, but do you like to transit to in another genres? Like, do you like to write tales or novels? And how it is your creative process? Like, do you like diligent sit in a table to write, or just when the inspiration comes to you, you write anywhere? Like, you don't need a notebook, you can write in a napkin. I don't know how it works for you.
Right. Thank you very much, Alison. It's so good to hear you, and because Gustav already talked about you. The creative process for me, because I come from a world that is really driven by orality. My people are orate more than they are literate. They speak. I think about things and compose things in my head and then write them down. And then when I write, something may come, I see things and observe things. That's why I lean towards poetry more than other genres, because then I see and observe and think that could be something that I could think more about. And so I then put down the things that may come to me, because I think a lot in pictures and in sound, image and sound. These are things that are very important to me. And so I put down, and then when I put down, I begin to compose and see if what I've put down makes sense first to me. Because I believe, like George Orwell said, that the word write, W-R-I-T-E, the I is in the middle. If it doesn't make sense to you, it may be very hard to make sense to others. And so for me, the creative process is about, especially in writing, it's about writing and rewriting until it makes sense to me, so that then I can feel confident enough to think it may make sense to others. And I write mainly in poetry, as I've explained, but I also write short stories. And I promised Gustavo I will send one short story at least to try it out. That has been very popular here for many reasons. It's about protest. So someone protested in the way that my short story, the character in my short story protested, and then people started sharing it a lot. And so it's become quite popular here in Uganda. And I will send it, and probably he can share it with you. I will scan it. It's published in a short story anthology called The Woman's Voice, published by Femwright. It's quite an early short story, but I choose to send that early short story. And you see, I have written some plays, but I have not published. I don't have any plays published. So basically, I have short stories and poetry. I was trying my hand at a novel, but it's not working as well as poetry works for me.
Yes, I can imagine. You know, I write, but I am not very disciplined. So sometimes I write poetry and I write short stories, but I take too much time writing one thing. This is what you said, that until it's right, it's not finished. So I'm writing a short story for 10 years now. You know, it's almost the age of my children, and I'm working on that. But I promise that when this book is finally published, I'll send you a physical copy, and so you can have our, a little bit of Brazil in your collection. So Maria wanted to ask a question, my friend.
Hello, Professor. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can. I can hear you a little. Do you mind speaking a little louder?
Oh, okay. Can you hear me better now?
Lovely. I can hear you now.
Thank you. It's just that I read a few of your poems that Gustavo showed us, and I noticed that the theme of motherhood and of childhood are very common themes in your work. And I was just wondering, when did you start writing and thinking about these themes as an academic?
Thank you very much. Actually, my earlier poetry, the mother figure does not dominate as it does in my later poetry. For some reason, I also sometimes get surprised when recently I've been putting together a collection of poems that is going to be published in my English original and then an Italian translation. And these poems, these most recent poems, the mother figure is so big in them. Partly, I think, because I began to consciously see how so central the mother figure is to my existence, and the mother figure is to our collective existence. And I began to see that some of the things that mothers do are not things that are a subject for TV shows. So sometimes the things that mothers do not make the limelight. And so I began to sensitively think, what does mother mean? And to me, this is a very important question, because I know that fathers influence a lot, but in my life especially, mother was dominant because my father died when I was 2 years old. And so my mother was the glue that kept us together and drove us. And I have one poem that is called Mother in Our Flag Colors. And it starts, for you, my mom, who will never make national news. And who will not be draped in national colors, because heroes and heroines are draped in national colors. But I then begin to enumerate things that I think mothers do and deserve their heroic acts. So for me, I think that my poetry is a way to center the woman figure, to make the woman figure visible in some way. We can only do a little part. You can't take the world by storm, but at least you can do your part. So in a way, my writing is doing my part by making people think about what mothers do. How, these marginalized voices, children and mothers, why are they marginalized? So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but it's not a question I expected. Such a brilliant question. So I think I need to go back and think even more about it. But all I know is mother is important, especially in the African context, especially in contexts where poverty is, where communities are marginalized, where there are power struggles, where dictators rule and say this is the way we should go. See? So then the people who are deemed as weak, who are deemed as voiceless, never get a chance to have their voices heard. And so as writers, I think it is our duty to make people see from another angle. And I think that's why I try that way. Thank you for the beautiful question.
That was
Thank you.
remarkably beautiful. Thank you, Maria, for this fantastic question. And thank you, Susan, for the most formidable answer I could listen. It was fantastic. You know, I was really touched by this moment now. You know, it was very, 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 because it connects to Brazil so profoundly. You know, this the figure of mother. Last question, because Susan is, you know, 1 hour. So last question, Flavio. So you will have the last question, my friend.
Just a commentary.
Oh, but there was also another question there. So we must have other questions.
Professor, I would like to thank you to the opportunity of this discussion, because when I read your work, I thought that our singularities sees to bring us closer, like a symphony. There are advances and setbacks, as if we were in a process of building who we are, without forgetting that there are contradictions that make us who you are. So thank you for your job. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
I have just to follow Flavio. Thank you, Susan, so much for this opportunity. You have enlightened our mornings, afternoons, evenings. You have brought such a positive energy. And I think Brazil is better now because you're speaking with us. You know, you have made our day so unforgettable. So we will keep this day in our hearts forever. So those that were here will never forget this moment. And so again, thank you so much. And my friends, my students, thank you for being here. You know,
there was one question there. Do you see that raised hand? Can we have 1 second?
Luigi has already done the commentary.
Okay.
So Susan, it's been a pleasure having you here, and we'll continue our conversation via email, and I believe this friendship will continue to bring transformations and learning and experiences for us and for the students that are around us. So again, it's been a pleasure. And my students, thank you so much too for believing this school, you know, trusting this project of teaching African literature in Brazil, you know, and bringing these bridges, bringing these lands together and building bridges. So my friends, that's it. That's all for today. Thank you, Susan. All the best, my friend. And that's it. We did it. Best regards, Susan. Bye-bye, my friends. Have a very good Saturday.
Thank you. Bye, everybody, and good luck. Good luck for the performance in the afternoon.
It's gonna be a success. Bye-bye.